Hello, and this is Bob Buzzanco, co-host of the Green and Red podcast. And I'm here today with something I think is really special. It's kind of a launch. One of the people who we've talked to the most on the Green and Red podcast has been Mike Elk, who is the founder and senior labor reporter of Payday Report. And Mike and I are going to start doing a weekly labor report based on what he's doing in Payday Report and other issues that come up at any particular time. So, to get started, welcome again, Mike. But why don't you just give a little background for somebody who maybe hasn't seen any of the stuff we've done together yet?
So I run a publication called Payday Report. We're funded by readers, primarily workers, union activists. And, we write about what's happening every week uh, in the news for workers. We wind up coming up with about 3 or 4 newsletters a week. And, we started, we were always a publication, but we really upticked during the pandemic because we've just seen so many strikes that, so much now can happen in a week in the labor movement. Certainly this week was a busy one.
Thanks, and that's paydayreport.com if anybody's interested. We're talking right now, and it's May 2nd, which means yesterday was May 1st, which in pretty much every country except for the US is an International Working Person's Day. And before we get started, you've been a labor reporter for quite some time. You've covered strikes and organizing drives and all kinds of other stuff, even outside labor, like the Tree of Life assault. And you were recently in Brazil doing some work there. But why don't you just talk a little bit about kind of May Day and labor and what it means to you? You're from Pittsburgh, big labor town. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, yesterday was interesting. So, May Day started off as an American holiday initially, from the Haymarket strikes in the late 1880s. A bunch of folks were killed in these strikes protesting for the 8-hour day. But, during McCarthyism and all this other stuff, we stopped celebrating it. But yesterday we had quite a bash here in Pittsburgh. Anne Feeney, who was a labor folk singer, I grew up around her. Um, when she died, Rolling Stone said she had played something like 2,000 shows in front of union audiences. Yesterday, there was a memorial to her here in Pittsburgh. Her guitar and her work was inducted into the permanent exhibit at the Heinz History Museum. And then there was a big shindig at night here. And it was quite a party. And it was quite interesting to see that generation. I mean, she would have been in her early 70s. She was a few years older than my dad. But to see that, the hippie generation really, which was my parents' generation, uh, come together last night was really interesting and really says something about, who kept the ball alive, who kept the ball moving forward in this country for so long when we had the X generation that was not very politically active. Versus, I always hate when people call out boomers because so many boomers were, protesting the Vietnam War and doing all this other stuff when it was really the X generation. So there was a big party here last night. I'm still recovering from it, but it was a great celebration, and it's a shame that we don't celebrate May Day in the same way that other countries do.
yeah, several years ago on campus, I used to try to have May Day celebrations. We bring out some union people to talk, and it was fun. We had a decent turnout. You mentioned Anne Feeney. When people think about folk singers, especially political folk singers, we think of the big ones, Dylan and Phil Oakes and people like that. But there's this amazing cadre of people who aren't as well known, like Anne Feeney, who have really been, really important to the movement. I mean, I've heard her songs for decades, and young activists sing along, and so she was really one of the greats. And rest in power, Anne Feeney. Talk a little bit about the latest issue of Payday Report. We've recently talked a couple times, within the past month, about the organizing drive in Chattanooga. And the last time we talked, it was a great show because it won fairly handily. And now apparently they're beginning negotiations, UAW and VW in Chattanooga. But before that, I actually have a question. Does the new local there, do they already have their leaders and their kind of structure in place? They have a
This is,
steward
this
and a,
is this is an interesting question, and I think there's some debate within the UAW about
uh,
this. It's interesting to watch because the UAW came in and they created 2 minority unions, one at Volkswagen, one at Mercedes, that were existing for a while. And there is some local leadership there, and it's unclear if that same local leadership is going to continue. Uh,
wow.
you know, So those are questions we don't quite know the answers to yet, but it is something interesting to watch because certainly, the Fein people want to put their people in. While Fein has been militant, I wouldn't necessarily say that Sean Fein is the most union democracy person in the world. I think it's important to note that the contract they passed at General Motors had less workers vote for it than the previous General Motors contract during the 2019 strike. And part of the reason why is that Fein ended the strike without calling for a ratification vote. So I'm not, while Fein talks a good militancy and talks a good game, I'm not convinced yet that he's so dedicated to union democracy. We shall see.
Yeah. So the negotiating unit at UAW, would that be a combination of national and local representatives, national lawyers, people like that?
Yeah, I don't know what it's going to look like
Yeah,
yet. We have to wait and see. But
yeah,
I think it is something interesting to watch to see how Fein sets this up. Um, because and this is something I think is important to bring up for a lot of readers. Every time somebody runs for union office, they all claim that they're the big champions of union democracy. Few of them are.
yeah.
It's
Well, we've seen that, and I think
easy. It's easy to claim that. So we haven't quite seen yet when the rubber hits the road with Fein on union democracy. Certainly, it wasn't impressive during the GM vote, and that contract passed by lesser margins than the contract in 2019.
yeah, yeah. I think one of the appeals of Fein to people outside is kind of the rhetoric, the apparent militancy, his willingness to take everybody on. And like just yesterday, I believe, and this is something we talked about. More labor leaders now, more labor unions are coming out with positions not just on Gaza, but also in the last few days on these horrific attacks on campus by the cops and various other agencies. And Fein issued a fairly strong statement yesterday about that. Basically saying that it's labor's duty to take action on issues that involve free speech. And another important point, which you brought up before, maybe you can speak to, is a lot of these unions now have younger people, they have students, they have people who graduated. So the face of labor doesn't look like it did, say, when you and I were growing up. Well, I'm older than you, but you get the point. So how does labor either benefit or perhaps not from taking a stand on these wars and on what's happening on campuses today, this
Well,
repression?
it's interesting to bring up. Oh, sorry, I was yawning. It's early. It was interesting to bring up because a third of the UAW now is graduate employees, right? So obviously, part of the reason why they've been so much more outspoken on the war in Gaza, on the attack on Gaza, is because they have a large base of graduate employees. So this has gotten them a lot more tuned into these issues. So it's not entirely clear, how long into the fight they're going to remain. I mean, it is interesting to bring up, right? Sean Fein said he's against the war in Gaza, and then he appears at the State of the Union and makes a big a scene in favor of Biden, right?
Yeah,
He's certainly, when Biden calls him and applauds him during the State of the Union, he's not standing there saying no war and showing no
yeah.
anti-war signs. So, we'll see when the rubber hits the road. And I think a lot of people are really in love with this administration, but it's not as necessarily clear that it's there yet.
Now, in the 60s, I remember years ago, I actually talked to Lane Kirkland about the AFL-CIO in Vietnam. His basic argument was we were doing well. We were getting jobs from so much of this, Pentagon spending. And is this, like, do you think currently now a situation like we're in, where the United States is sending tens of billions of dollars to places like not just Israel, but Ukraine and Taiwan and all over? How's labor looking up? I know, traditionally the kind of construction trades have been a little more conservative, other unions, but is there any sense within labor that this is either hurting or helping them?
I don't think there is any real sense. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of talk about Palestine because it's such a hot button issue there. But we've seen no discussion about defense spending in Ukraine or
Yeah,
Taiwan at
yeah,
all, which are both problematic for anti-imperialist reasons. So it's not entirely clear to me how deep this goes yet and how long this maintains. Obviously, people that are watching, the war in Gaza, it's such an outrage, it's such a massive genocide that a lot of people are opposed to it. But, these other imperialist ambitions, such as the Ukraine and Taiwan,
yeah,
you don't really hear people talking about.
yeah. Yeah, there was always a sense, I think, around here, because, I'm from Youngstown area, which is very similar to where you grew up. And I hear a lot of working people, even union members, essentially, and they've been saying this for a long time. And I think it's actually directed more at the Democrats than not, is, they don't care about us. They're out there spending money here and there. I mean, recently I've heard people say, they've sent billions to Israel, but, East Palestine, which is 30 minutes away, hasn't been cleaned up yet. Youngstown has never recovered, right? Population is half of what it was. And, I just kind of wondered if that was becoming a more prevalent view as well, because there is that sense that, they don't care about us. They come here every 4 years, they kiss our butts, and then they're gone.
Yeah, I certainly think that's still a real view. And I think, a lot of my friends in Brazil ask me, how do you think the election's going to turn out in the United States? And I don't think we quite know the answer to that one yet.
No, no, we don't. But it's probably not going to be great, no matter what the outcome is.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do because Biden often says, "I am the most pro-labor president in history," and when he says that, what's your reaction?
Well, that's not a very high bar. That's like telling
Yeah,
your only sister she's your favorite sister, right?
yeah,
Certainly, he's been much better than, Clinton or Obama, and has gotten out there and helped out workers. But that's not really saying much. I mean, you can say you're the most pro-labor president ever, but you're still killing workers in Palestine.
yeah,
I mean, they're killing workers every day in Palestine. So what does that mean? I don't know.
yeah. And well, and Flint still doesn't have clean water either, right?
Yeah.
So, East Palestine has been cleaned up. So we're seeing that time and again. I mean, kind of getting in more general question, do you sense, and we've brought this up before, do you sense a kind of militancy among just basic union membership as well? I mean, we're hearing rhetoric. There's a lot of younger members, but are more and more people saying, hey, this system really is, screwed up, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, certainly we're seeing an uptick in union organizing across the US. The statistics bear this out. Unions have much greater approval ratings. How far that type of organizing goes remains to be seen.
Yeah.
So, I think we're at an interesting time. We don't quite know what's going to happen. I think this election certainly.
One of the other issues we talked about Chattanooga earlier, there's also an organizing campaign in Alabama at a Mercedes plant, and some news has come out of there this week, right?
Yeah, certainly. There's going to be a union drive May 12th to May 17th. There'll be an election in Vance, Alabama, at the Mercedes plant there for about 5,000 workers. They've been organizing for 25 years there, and they have not gotten close to a union vote. So this will be a real test. From what I understand, they have about 70% sign up. Management at the plant has responded desperately and just fired the plant manager. And from what I'm hearing, things are going relatively well there. Um, so, that's certainly an exciting bright point. If they can win there, hopefully they can keep the momentum going at other auto plants. We'll see. Certainly they're going to go after a lot of suppliers, because once the main auto factory in an area unionizes, that puts a lot of pressure on the smaller suppliers and the smaller factories around there.
Yeah. So 70% is pretty significant. That's essentially when you want a union, you go around and people sign a card saying they want to hold a vote, right?
Yes.
So that would be 70%. Normally, I mean, kind of what's the target is usually like around what, 50, 60%. You want to, obviously it has to be over 50, but 70 is pretty good, right? Comparatively.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a strong show of force, and that's about what the UAW won at Volkswagen in Chattanooga. They won with 73% of the vote. So it's a strong show of support, and they're looking very strong going into the last week of the election.
What shifted in the South? The South, better than me, has traditionally been hostile from Operation Dixie onward. But we're seeing now these really significant victories in very, very red states like Tennessee and perhaps Alabama. What's changed in the last decade or so?
Well, I think what's changed in the last decade is certainly the pandemic. We've seen a lot of growth in the South too. The pandemic changed everybody's attitudes nationwide about unions and about strikes and about everything, and people wanted a larger piece of the pie. The other thing is that there's a huge labor shortage in manufacturing in the South now, right? So we've seen that change, and also I think the Big Three strike recently attracted a lot of attention to how much money a lot of workers were leaving on the table, to how much more money could be gained in the union drives. And so I think it's a really big opportunity for labor, and we're going to start seeing them push more and more. And I think it's a real opening.
Yeah. Well, it's significant too because you're looking at large memberships. There were what, 4,300 in Chattanooga, and I think you said Mercedes is even bigger plant,
5,000, yes.
5,000. So that's significant because so much in the last few years has revolved around, 12 workers at Starbucks or 15 workers at Trader Joe's or something like that, which is really important, obviously. But having these larger memberships really, kind of brings a lot of people in, a lot of dues in, right? Um, what's now we've seen a few unions have already endorsed Joe Biden, but a lot have criticized them more than normal, I think. But do you think labor will be deeply involved in trying to get Democrats elected? And
No question, no question. You're going to see it, right? I mean,
yeah,
see it across the board. I mean, Sean Fain and all those other people, they're already on board. They're already, starting to say, Biden was one of the best labor presidents ever. And, while the UAW claims to be for a ceasefire in Gaza, they're certainly not doing much publicly to
yeah,
support it. Now that will be tested in coming weeks. Certainly, we're seeing the UCLA graduate employees that are UAW members are taking a strike vote. So we'll see how much pressure is applied in coming weeks. And I think we'll know a lot more in the next couple of weeks.
yeah. It's worth noting too. I think some of the strongest anti-imperial representatives, like Rashida Tlaib or Summerlee, or also have great labor records, and they're making the connection, especially in places like Michigan, where Biden is not running well in a state, which is he has to win. So yeah, I think there's a real connection there between labor and what's happening in Gaza. Anyway, is there anything you want to say as we're leaving? Keep
Well,
this brief.
it was a great May Day yesterday, and I hope people go and they listen to Anne Feeney's music. It's certainly great music. And that I hope people think, about the role they play in an international labor movement.
Yeah,
I think, with students striking on campuses, with the UAW having this position against the war in Gaza, but not very active, we as a labor movement are going to be tested. And I don't think we as a labor movement have done enough yet to try to stop the war. If we were striking at General Motors, we could stop this war today.
yeah,
That is not what's occurring.
yeah.
It's a half loaf kind of measure by the UAW, and we have to see if they're willing to get more militant. And it doesn't appear that way. So I think we have to really think of ourselves this May Day in a more global context and ask ourselves, are we doing enough?
Yeah, I think that's always been kind of one of the main arguments on the left. Mike, thanks so much. It's great talking to you. And, we'll continue this and, give people kind of a sense. Is there anything specific you see coming up in the next week or so besides the Alabama vote that we should know about?
No. I mean, there's always news. People can come to our website and check it out.
Exactly. PaydayReport.com. Mike Elk, who is the founder and senior labor reporter. And check out Payday Report. Check out Mike's bio. You can see where he comes from. And he is the product of a great mentor, a famous journalist, William Greider, one of the giants. So is it William Greider? Yeah, it was William Greider, right? Yeah. Okay. I had a mind freeze for a moment there. Anyway, this is Bob Buzzanco from Green and Red Podcast with Mike Elk from Payday Report, with a Payday Report Green and Red joint effort to discuss the state of labor this week. And thank you for listening, and make sure you check back and subscribe and share and all that kind of good stuff. So thanks.
Working at this job is dirty and dangerous, and I'm taking risks anyway. Oh, if I had the time and the proper equipment, I could do my job safely each day. Everybody here says they're sticklers for safety, and I'm not here to say that they lie. I'm saying we just come to work here. We don't come to die. Now I don't want your chemicals clouding my brain. I wanna keep all of my fingers and toes. I wanna hear those cheers at both of my ears when my working days come to a close. Work that I do here is dangerous enough. Don't you rush me, and I'm telling you why. We just come to work here. We don't come to die. Now while you're up there talking in an air-conditioned office on a telephone that's OSHA approved, go on and tell me how much you've been spending on safety. Pardon me, I'm not moved. There's only one way to put an end to the slaughter. Just look your boss right in the eye and say, we just come to work here. We don't come to die. and busting and watched our plants rusting while our jobs shipped overseas. 60,000 workers that we buried last year found the cost of doing business too high. We just